Have you ever just been flipping through channels on TV and stumbled upon a show based on a hit movie and thought to yourself, what in the world is this? For years, television executives have attempted to capitalize on brand recognition from popular films. Some are successful, but most aren't. In fact, most TV adaptations fall flat on their faces and usually don't last more than a season. But it seems like in recent years, there's been a slew of these new shows on network TV and there's no end in sight. My goal with this series is to show you why exactly it's not always the greatest idea to adapt a movie into a TV show. Because in most cases, the movie was better. The first time I saw Ferris Bueller's Day Off, I was about 16 years old. This movie really captivated me. It's a classic American comedy with great characters and a very relatable premise for teenagers everywhere. School sucks, and there's a whole world out there to explore and experience. Audiences have celebrated the movie for years for Ferris's witty one-liners and carefree spirit. Matthew Broderick brings this character to life with such lovable charm. He fits the role so perfectly and makes it impossible for anyone to hate. Except maybe that guy. Whatever happened to that guy? You know what? Let's move on. When Ferris Bueller's Day Off was released in 1986, it was a box office hit. This is back in the 80s when you could still make a good studio movie for less than $50 million. John Hughes' film is widely considered a classic, and references to it continue to live on in media even now, more than 30 years later. So, because the film was a hit, it's a happy ending, right? It was a critical and financial success. Well, since people in Hollywood like money, things like this never really end when they should. In 1989, NBC announced they were developing a pilot for a TV adaptation of Ferris Bueller's Day Off. After a few months of development and production, Ferris Bueller found its way to the airwaves. This version attempted to mimic the movie's comedic antics and sharp wit. There's just one problem. They failed miserably. The show ran for 13 episodes before being canned by the network. Critics and audiences both hated it. And since there's no box office to rely on to recoup losses, NBC pulled the plug when they realized they were just wasting everyone's time and money, especially the advertisers. What I want to look at in this first episode is why the Ferris Bueller TV show failed so horribly and what elements were changed for the adaptation that ended up ruining the very essence of what Ferris Bueller's Day Off was all about. By the way, I'm only going to be focusing on the first episode of the show's only season because I think it perfectly encapsulates everything wrong about this adaptation. Let's just start at the beginning of the pilot. The first 12 seconds or so just flash to different items in Ferris's room that remind you, yes, this is the 90s. Then a character that looks nothing like Ferris Bueller notices the camera is rolling and sits up and starts babbling. He makes some unfunny quip.
Life is one damn thing after another. Mark Twain said that after he changed his name.
And then he goes on to explain that he's the real Ferris Bueller and that Matthew Broderick was just the actor that played him. Yes, you heard it right. Ferris Bueller is a real person, and he doesn't live in Illinois. He lives in California, USA, baby. Then he does this. By doing this, the writers basically held up a giant middle finger to the entire audience of Ferris Bueller fans.
This is television. This is real.
No wonder people hated this show. However, this whole setup is just the tip of the iceberg. They then cut to his sister Jeannie, who is played by some actress I don't really recognize. I think her name is Jennifer Aniston? I don't know, sounds right to me. Out of all the characters in this flop, she actually does the best job portraying the character from the movie. She's pissed at Ferris for getting away with everything and gets herself into trouble because of her hubris. The one aspect the adaptation actually got right. It's amazing. Ferris blabs more about why he doesn't like school, but still goes to it anyways.
Don't get me wrong. High school is important. It's the only way to keep track of friends.
Then he pulls up a picture of his best friend Cameron, who is basically a non-character in this show. And he also pulls up a picture of Sloane, who was his girlfriend in the movie, but in this point in the show, he actually hasn't met her yet. So why do you have that picture? Are you like a stalker or something? As he's heading down to breakfast, he says he's leaving the audience behind in his room to hang out. And honestly, it would have just been great if the last 20 minutes was just a shot of nothing, because it would have been eons better than the 2.5 minutes we've spent with him so far. But unfortunately, he pops his dumb head back in and decides to let us come with him. Fine, I guess. While Movie Ferris faked an illness to get out of going to school, this Ferris is actually going. So right there's already a huge contrast with the film. One of the big reasons that Ferris Bueller's Day Off works as a story is because, well, it's his day off. He's never seen at school, and the whole plot revolves around him having wacky adventures in Chicago while his evil principal tries to track him down. Rooney and Ferris don't even come face to face until the end of the third act, at which point Ferris doesn't even say a word to Rooney. In fact, the only 2 times they have a conversation in this movie, only one of them speaks the entire time, while the other just listens in shock. This payoff is so satisfying at the end because of the release of tension. Instead, the show kind of changes the dynamic to make it more of a direct correspondence between Ferris and Rooney, which sort of deflates the tension when Ferris gets caught and just weasels his way out of it thanks to super dumb and convenient writing. The bare bones plot of the episode is that Ferris picks up Cameron in a limousine and they drive to school. When he's at school, he sees Sloane in person. Then he stalks her throughout the rest of the day and pesters her to get lunch with him. But instead of at school, they're gonna go to the beach. Then they steal his sister's car and go to that beach. Sloane tells him that she wants to be a ballet dancer while he annoyingly hits on her. She kisses him even though they only met like 3 hours ago and she barely knows this creep. After lunch, the two return to school where Principal Rooney is waiting in the parking lot, and then he catches them in the act. But then Ferris says he'll have to speak with his lawyer. The lawyer is able to get Ferris's punishment dropped down to just detention. But then it turns out that he's not a lawyer, he's just some guy impersonating one. So Cameron shows up and Ferris tells him that he can't give him another limo ride home. Ah, dang it. Hey, you guys remember Cameron? He's a great character in the movie, but in this show, all he does is complain about why everything Ferris is doing is wrong. Even though nothing Ferris is doing in the plot has any real bearing on Cameron, unlike the movie. Also, they never really established that earnest friendship between Ferris and Cameron like the film. They don't feel like best friends in the show. All they had to do was include tiny details like this and the whole thing wouldn't have been so cynical. But anyways. Jeannie gets arrested for driving a stolen vehicle even though it's her own. She gets this crazy idea that Ferris hired a fake cop to prank her, so she speeds off in her car and is presumably arrested off screen, I guess? Then Ferris hacks into the police computer and changes her bail to $250,000. Jesus Christ, are you serious? In the first 2 minutes, you said your mom was stingy about the power bill, but yet you're just gonna make them pay $250,000 to bail your sister out? Are you an idiot? Not only does his hacking not make any logical sense, but it's also a huge felony by itself. In fact, this Ferris commits a litany of crimes in just this one episode. Number 1, he uses a remote control to collapse a hole inside the wooden stage that Rooney falls into, which basically borders on assault. Number 2, he gives out stolen parking passes to students that need them. Number 3, he commits grand theft auto by stealing his sister's car. He leaves school during lunch to do this, and he also skimps out of detention, which isn't really breaking the law per se, but it is still against school rules. Number 4, he bribes a man to impersonate a lawyer, which is 2 crimes in 1. And finally, as I mentioned before, he hacks into the police headquarters computer system and changes his sister's bail. So, if Ferris Bueller didn't have the most incredible luck in the world, and he wasn't an omnipotent Gary Stu, he would most likely be put in juvenile detention until being tried as an adult, because he'd definitely get caught immediately.
This is television. This is real.
Yeah, I'm gonna call bullshit on that. All of this happens in just the first episode. I can't imagine how much worse the show could get after those painstaking 24 minutes. They took fun and lovable Ferris Bueller and turned him into a douchey, obnoxious felon. The only real crime that Movie Ferris actually commits is hacking into his school's computer and changing his recorded absences. I guess you can say that hijacking a parade is a crime, but I don't think anybody really cared because he did a great job lip syncing and dancing. And I guess he technically entered strangers' properties, but he doesn't do anything but cut through backyards, really. Sure, it might be considered illegal to impersonate a student's father to get her out of school on false pretenses, but really? Who's that hurting? Who's the victim? My point being that while Ferris did wacky stuff in the movie, it was pretty tame in terms of rebellious lawbreaking. In the movie, Ferris isn't a sociopath and also has a moral conscience and gets to experience the reality of his selfishness when it all leads to this happening.
How many miles did you say this thing had on it when we left?
126 and halfway between 3 and 4/10. Why? How many miles are on it now?
When he realizes he's done wrong, he attempts to make right the situation by throwing out desperate suggestions. Cameron's entire character arc culminates in him taking the blame and standing up to his father. Movie Ferris actually has remorse for his actions. But TV Ferris? Nah, he just does whatever the hell he wants. And at the end of the day, both kick their feet up. The difference is that one is a clever kid who lucked out on a great day of fun,
while the other is a devious asshole who Zach Morrises his way through his first day of junior year.
As a result, the audience ends up remembering one fondly and wishing to never see the other again.
That's probably the main reason why folks couldn't get into this show.
Well, that and everything else about it. The obnoxious soundtrack, the crappy look of the show, the unlikability of the lead actor, and just the plain lack of respect for the source material. Look at this title sequence. It's so bad, it looks like a Tim and Eric sketch.
And since this is a television show after all, I'm sure that somewhere in the next 12 episodes they actually develop Cameron's character, as well as Ferris. But honestly, the pilot was so bad that I don't think I could even force myself to watch another episode.
If you take out all the elements of a movie that make it good and cram what's left into a 24-minute pilot, you get this shit. Do I blame the actor? No, I blame the writers and the producers for slapping this crap together and tricking people into watching something they thought they could enjoy, when in reality, the end product is a soulless, cynical fanfiction of a classic comedy that is infinitely more enjoyable on all levels. So I think it kind of goes without saying at this point that the movie was better. I'd make the argument that it shouldn't have ever been attempted by NBC in the first place. But maybe that's why it stands for nothing but cancellations. Not every great thing needs to last forever, but the legacy of the movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off will, unlike this crap. In fact, there's a reason it's hard to find information on the internet about a bad show that was canceled almost 30 years ago. Go watch Ferris Bueller's Day Off if you haven't seen it. I can't recommend it enough. It's fun, it's got great music, and not to mention it's downright hilarious. And while you're watching, just remember, life moves pretty fast. If you get cast in a TV show that's adapting a beloved movie, it could get canceled at any point. And in the words of Ferris Bueller,
you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it.
yeah, I don't really think anyone's gonna miss this shit.